All right. The Korean airliner was shot down. There was a lot of hue and cry and moral outrage, and we got it in the United Nations and so forth. In 1978 or 79, the Israelis shot down a Libyan civilian aircraft because it had violated Israeli airspace. President Nixon sent a wire to Gaddafi and to Sadat apologizing for this incident. There was no talk about it going into the United Nations. The International Pilots Associations had their meeting. There was 102 nations that voted to condemn Israel, and 4 that voted not to, and the American representative abstained. Why? Because we couldn't create an enemy there. But when the Soviets shoot down an airliner, the same situation, we rise in moral outrage against this act. What is the difference? Because it's insistent. We must insist that the Soviets have got to be created as an enemy. Otherwise, if they're not really a big enough enemy, how are we going to get appropriations for more arms? Now, and I'd like to get into the other area. I'm sorry if this is a speech and you don't like them, but people keep talking about national security, and we got to be tough and we got to be strong. Okay, we're tough and we're strong, and we've released all these missiles now, the intermediate range missile, the Pershing II, and we're going to have more Tridents too. And what was the Soviet response? The Soviet response is to put cruise missile into attack submarines and put more of them off our coast. Now, if someone's going to tell me that that increases our national security, well, I don't know. It's a whole ballgame that I don't understand.
He's right. He doesn't understand it because you need the risk in order to have a threat that needs to get funded to go fight the risk. And that's what the whole Cold War was. But that was Paul Newman, everybody. I enjoy some of the foodstuffs he left behind with Newman's Own. They make good food. You can you take it or leave it. All right. So now, Israel shot down an airline. That's an interesting story. Is that like the time that they shot up the USS Liberty and no one did anything about it? We might hear about that soon. But first, let's rewind. There was some math in that Lavender Where's Daddy video by GDF. And one of it was for junior Hamas members. Let's do it live. Let's do some math. I don't do math usually on a live show, but I do if I have a calculator that I've used before. So that's the rule. They said 15 to 20. So let's say 15 to 20 per junior. And they had 30, let's see, I messed it up already. 15 times 37,000 equals, it's about 500,000 people that they authorized. But wait, there's more because there was another calculation. Now, not all 37,000 are juniors. Some of those 37,000 are Hamas senior leaders, and they said you could kill up to 100 people per, let's say there's 25 senior leaders. So they authorized another 2,500 people to get killed with that. So, I mean, did you catch those ratios, Scott? And did you make anything of it? Like that seemed like, and when they changed, I'm sorry, did I press the wrong button? Did you guys see any of that I was doing? Or did I just press the wrong button?
No, we saw it. No, you're good.
All right, cool.
We saw it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers were kind of shocking, and I'm familiar with that story and all that type of content, but rewatching it during the show, I'm like, that's a lot of people that you just say, okay, and they don't even go check. They're not even checking the AI. Like the human only has to spend like, oh, this looks like it's not a fighter. This guy who's 85 years old. Take him off the list, dude. But no, leave all those people from 17 till death. If you're a man over there, they do know how to define it over in Hamas land, surprisingly enough. They get on the list for the Lavender Israeli kill list. It reminded me of that story from the Bible. Like, let me know if I'm wrong here. There was a time they were in Egypt and the angel of death was going to fly over and they had to put some blood above their doors to keep the angel of death away. So I'm thinking if Hamas would just get some lamb's blood and paint it on the buildings are already blown up. Shit. We should have told them that earlier. But it might have prevented the whole angel of death thing that Lavender and Where's Daddy facilitate. Will be my point.
They just put it on their tents now, at least. Like at this point, just put it on your tent.
There's human blood on their tents now.
Yeah, it's already there. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Holodomor and death bar starvation, there was also burnt offerings. Holocaust means a sacrificial burnt offering. They've had both recently down there. And we'll get to the sacrificing part later because I did some blood libel research. Fascinating history that we're going to check out later. But first, I got to take you over here. Let's go back to the past for a second. Back on September 11th, 1891, a guy named by Moses Hess 30 years earlier, Baron Maurice de Hirsch, was part of Moses Hess's utopian plan because he's the father of utopian socialism, which is what the Nazis were. They were utopian socialists. The father of utopian socialism, who also inspired the Nazis, predicted that Baron Maurice de Hirsch would help in the colonization of Palestine. So when people say it's not a colonization, they don't know how to read or they don't read. Either way, don't use them as an information source. You could also look up Rothschild and early Jewish colonization of Palestine. Two things that are said not to exist, colonization and Palestine, in a book from Hebrew University. You could read all about it. So here's the JCA, colonization being the key word. The Colonization Association on September 11th by Baron Hirsch, its aim was to facilitate mass emigration of the Jews from Russia and other Eastern European countries by settling them in agricultural settlements in the lands purchased by the committee. And if you just scroll down, here's Edmund de Rothschild. It's a Rothschild project. Okay, I got you. Colonization, Palestine, Rothschild. Not just this source, but also this source right here on screen, right there. Let's zoom out. In Palestine is the whole title. They don't want to put it on the cover, but there it is. That's the title. Okay. And you want to see who it's printed by? It's printed by the anti-Semites over at a place called Hebrew University. Okay. Right there. So this is facts and history that must be dealt with. This is also facts and history that must be dealt with. Because if I quickly just went in here, I bet I could find Baron Hirsch's name. Here's the Rothschild's name right here. Rothschild brothers. There's Baron Hirsch. Oh, look at that, by Hirsch. Look at this. So this is 1862. Hirsch liked that idea because over here, September 11th, 1891, Baron Hirsch is taking action. Interesting. Interesting. Huh. We're going to learn some more, but I just wanted to point that out. You also have James Armand de Rothschild as part of the Palestine Colonization Association. It's not just the JCA, it's the PJCA. Okay? So when looking at these things, Ron DeSantis and your team, when you're looking up history on these things, I wanted you to be able to see that. But wait, there is more, because we heard in those clips United Nations Security Resolution 242. Why did they have to write 242? It's right here on my t-shirt, bro. 6 days war. This happened. What are we going to do about it? 242. Now, what I did notice is that for being a Declaration of Independence, United Nations good buddy, right? And then knowing that the United Nations was funded by the same people that funded the Nazis in the first place makes that all highly ironic. Throw in Nelson Rockefeller being blackmailed for those November 1947 votes. It gets a whole lot more interesting. And then you get to 242, which is fascinating. Let me just read a little bit for you, because this comes around in November, Kennedy assassination anniversary. So it's not September 11th. This one's November 22nd. UN Security Council Resolution 242 was adopted unanimously by the United Nations Security Council on November 22nd, 1967, in the aftermath of the 6-day war. It was adopted under the UN Charter, and you can go down and you can read all about it. And that's nice. That's a little piece of history. However, I noticed that they don't follow the rules. So there's all these resolutions and rules, and the guy in the last video, he showed they don't follow a lot of the rules that are set out by the organization from which they got their independence, right? There's a interesting aspect of history, and I looked it up, and I said, is there a Wikipedia page on it? And sure enough, and now that we know the context, it ties into the stories we're covering. So this is going to get even a little bit more nerdy interesting, because there's this thing called the Kol Nidre. The Kol Nidre is a type of a yearly ceremony to say, you know, any commitments I make in the next year, I'm not going to have to keep them. In other words, if the UN says we don't have to, like, we're not allowed to do something, we could say, yeah, we're not going to do it, but we could do it anyway because we got this thing yearly. It's an annual renewal program for being able to not tell the truth. So let me break it down in a little wiki ease. Kol Nidre is a Hebrew and Aramaic declaration, which is recited in the synagogue before the beginning of the evening service on the night of Yom Kippur. Now, there's a Yom Kippur War, and then 10/7 is the 50th anniversary of that Yom Kippur War. There might be something to do with this ceremony that goes on during Yom Kippur. Strictly speaking, it's not a prayer, even though it's commonly spoken of as if it was a prayer. This declaration and its ceremonial accompaniment have been charged with emotional undertones since the medieval period. Oh, we're going to learn about medieval period coming up later. Creating a dramatic introduction to Yom Kippur on what is often dubbed Kol Nidre night. With the entire Yom Kippur evening service popularly called Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre is a written mixture of Aramaic and Hebrew. The name is taken from the opening words, which means all vowels. The formula proactively annuls any personal or religious oaths or prohibitions which are made between oneself and God in the course of the next year, so as to preemptively avoid the sin of breaking vows which are made to God but not or cannot be upheld. So it has a more interesting history, but this is the Wikipedia definition. This is where you would start. Then you would go to some of the references. Then you would read the Jewish Encyclopedia and go to the Jewish Virtual Library. There's a whole bunch of standard places. And then you can get into the books that would talk about this type of thing and see maybe how it could have effects on international relations if one side has a rule that they could break rules. On the other hand, maybe it doesn't have anything to do with anything. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's some chutzpah right there.
It's
Some
beyond
chutzpah.
chutzpah,
Yeah.
which is also Norman Finkelstein book
Yeah.
that was in that stack of books in that trailer earlier tonight. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happen. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.